Hello and welcome to the London part of the show. I'm Christian Fraser. Joining me for the duration, Conservative MP for Chelsea and Fulham and Minister for London, Greg Hands. Morning. And the Labour MP for Bethnal Green and Bow, Rushanara Ali. Welcome to you both. Thank you. So, as the Tory faithful assemble in Manchester to rake over the embers of a disappointing electoral campaign, the post-mortem over what went wrong in London is bound to feature. The Conservatives expected to win seats. Instead, they were pummeled, with Labour winning over half of the vote in the capital, their best result since the days of Clement Attlee. So how did London come to stand between the Conservatives and a majority in Parliament? And what, if anything, can they do about it? Andrew Cryan has more.
The Conservative manifesto of 2017 read like it had, well, a bit of a downer on Britain's capital city. Time and time again, it talked about how power and wealth were too concentrated in London, and even saying that closing the gap between here and the rest of the country was the biggest prize in Britain today.
Manifestos are about wording and about the nuance of the wording. Now, it may well be that what Theresa May wanted to do was replicate the success and the wealth and spread the wealth of London across the rest of the country. But what it came across as is at the expense of London, i.e. London, you've had enough. We will then take it away from London and spread it around the rest of the country.
It was a message that helped the Conservatives lose the wealthiest seat in the country, West London's Kensington. At first glance, it seems incredible that Labour can now hold a seat where the average salary is £148,000 a year. But do London's housing problems help explain what happened? The house prices here are so high they could make a banker feel poor. The average home here costs an enormous 38.5 times more than their already enormous average local salary. It means the people of Kensington are less likely to be able to buy their home than anywhere else in the country. And not just here but across London did the Conservative record on housing cost them at the ballot box.
We have not done anywhere near enough to offer people any kind of hope about getting on the housing ladder. And when you're stuck in your mum's box room, age 30, and yet you're doing everything right, you are holding down a job, and you're ambitious about what you want to achieve in life, you look at the Conservatives and think they don't offer me anything. And I hope that at the party conferences, Theresa May will address that issue.
The other side of life in Kensington also came into focus this summer with the tragedy of the Grenfell fire. In the immediate aftermath, the council's offices were stormed, and it's possible that local anger could mean the borough, which has been Conservative for its entire existence, turns Labour at next year's local election.
There's no doubt at all that the council did not respond well in the immediate aftermath of the fire, and that will undoubtedly play a part in people's minds when they think about how to cast their vote next May. And it won't be helpful to the Conservatives, obviously.
And in London, the Conservatives are up against an incredibly strong Labour Party machine. Now the largest political party in Europe, it's stronger in the capital than anywhere else in the country. And in some parts of town, as many as 1 in 10 registered voters are now card-carrying Labour members. The Conservative machine in London is much weaker.
Frankly, the reality is that outside of the London MPs, outside of the London Voluntary Party, there are actually few members in the Conservative Party, or indeed around the Cabinet, who really understand the unique challenges that we're facing in London. Now, they've done the right thing. They've appointed a vice-chairman, a London MP, Stephen Hammond, vice-chairman for London. But he needs the executive power to deliver. He needs a unit and a team from which he can build a campaigning organisation across London.
Of course, it's not impossible for Conservatives to win in the capital, as this guy proved twice. But for the party trying to deliver Brexit in the city that voted for Remain, the next few years could prove very tricky indeed.
Well, joining us live from the Conservative conference in Manchester is Ben Page, CEO of the pollsters Ipsos Mori. Ben Page, what happened to the Conservatives in London in June?
Well, they lost another 6 seats. And remember, in 2015, when the Conservatives won a general election with a swing towards them, in the capital, the swing went the other way in 2015, 9% to Labour. So Labour has cumulatively got stronger and stronger in the capital. Sadiq Khan, the mayor, is massively popular by political standards or modern political standards, and Labour is well ahead in the polls. And it partly reflects just how different London is to the rest of Britain in its concerns and its population profile in some ways.
When you look at the rest of the country, though, the Conservatives have improved in Scotland, they've improved in the north, and yet in London they are flatlining. So what is it about the message that appeals outside the capital that isn't resonating with young professionals here?
I think what you have to remember is that although London is one of the wealthiest parts of the UK, at least on paper, the lived reality of life in London is very, very different. And so Londoners are much more concerned about housing than the rest of Britain. And interestingly, they're more concerned about poverty and indeed the economy as a whole. Because although, yes, wages are higher in London and there's full employment, the cost of living there is so much greater that, you know, it doesn't work out for people. And I think that's what is part of this sense that things aren't, you know, the Conservative messages just don't seem to offer any options or any real difference or hope for people, particularly for younger people in London.
The median age in the capital is around 34. Does that mean that Brexit is a problem for the Conservatives?
Well, it's clear that Brexit didn't help the Conservatives. Losing seats like Kensington and Chelsea, I mean, this is phenomenal stuff. But of course, you know, most people in London voted for Remain. Having a government committed to Brexit doesn't excite them. And, you know, you've got either people staying away from the ballot box, just not voting at all, or, you know, or in some cases actually genuinely switching to Labour. And of course there are divisions inside the Labour Party, and nothing in politics these days is at all certain. But at the moment the Conservatives are in a very difficult place, and you know, there are even the majorities of the MPs that they have in London went down at the election in many cases.
This is all very sobering stuff for Greg Hands, who's sitting here, Minister for London. But what does he have to change then in order to get people voting Conservative again?
I think, I mean, in a way it's similar in part to the challenge for the Conservatives in the country as a whole. For the voters under 44 who overall voted Labour at the general election, the Conservatives have to have more of a retail offer. So whether, you know, it might be something on tuition fees, probably what they've offered isn't enough, quite frankly, but it's really about housing. The Conservatives have to show that they are going to make housing available to people, and that means affordable to people. And Help to Buy on its own, I'm afraid, probably will not do it, certainly for the capital.
The talk where you are in Manchester is all about Boris Johnson and his leadership ambitions. Party members have him up there as the favourite, but could the unthinkable happen and he lose his seat in Uxbridge?
You know, these days, to be honest, almost anything can happen. So, you know, a targeted campaign, he slips up, perfectly possible. He does have the appeal of being, you know, as being unusual. That was how he was partly able to stand, as indeed did Ken Livingstone, almost apart from his party when he was Mayor of London. But I think now he's back in Conservative mainstream in the eyes of many voters. So let's see. You know, probably pretty safe because he's got amazing name recognition. He's a great campaigner, but overall, the big problem facing the Conservatives is what is their retail offer for the under 44s?
Yeah, still a majority of 5,000 for Boris. Before I let you go, Ben, your predictions for Theresa May for the council elections in May?
I'm not going to make any predictions, particularly this far away from May, but if you look at the polling in London, it certainly isn't good. And given that seats like Kensington have actually gone Labour, some of those Conservative-held councils that have seemed absolutely invulnerable may be up for grabs.
OK, playing it safe. Ben Page, good to see you in Manchester. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
So, Greg, Katie Perrier, the former Director of Communications at Number 10, in Andrew's film, saying you've not done anywhere near enough on housing for the under-30s in London.
Well, we have done quite a lot and we'll be doing more. A number of announcements this morning by Theresa May in relation to things like Help to Buy, our existing commitment to ban letting agents and take action in the private sector rented market. We are building more homes in London. We could do with a bit more cooperation from Labour councils. For example, the Earls Court development with the Labour Council Hammersmith and Fulham. They need to also get on with making sure that development is accelerated. 10,000 new homes just on the edge of Kensington. Really important, some of these developments. So we are doing more, but we need to do more still on top of that. I think the target should be about 75,000 new homes in London each year. We're currently delivering around 30,000. We need to work and make sure that the Mayor of London and all of those crucial London boroughs, which I think will be an important issue in next year's council elections, Ben mentioned the council elections, and I think next year is going to be a choice between well-run Conservative councils and the opportunity of having a well-run Conservative council, or what is a London Labour Party, a London Labour Party,
a well-run Conservative council,
and a London Labour Party that has been taken over by the hard left. And people will need to ask themselves, if they were going to vote Labour next May, what kind of Labour are they actually going to get?
But even your own party said that Kensington and Chelsea were a shambles over the Grenfell Tower.
Kensington and Chelsea Council did not, I think we all agree, did not respond well on Grenfell. You've got to remember, this is a council that has been rated by successive governments, actually Labour and Conservative governments, as being one of the best-run councils in Britain. OK, they did not do well in the immediate aftermath of Grenfell. There's a public inquiry going on. There's other inquiries going on looking at their role. It's also worth remembering they weren't the only council to do the cladding. Camden Council, other London Labour councils also had the same cladding.
Part of the problem for your party is what Ben Page has just defined, the demographics of the problem. We're going to talk to Rushanara in a moment about what her party's done. They're all card-carrying members. 1 in 10 in some boroughs are card-carrying Labour members. Where is the youth movement within the Conservatives in London? It's non-existent.
I disagree. In Hammersmith and Fulham, for example, we've got a very young Conservative group. In various parts of London, we've got very good young Conservative councillors, some of whom are actually running their councils, doing a great job. I think we need to get the message out next May that Conservative councils are better run, cost you less, and actually compared to the only thing standing in between residents and having a hard left Labour council. This is a story also about momentum and Corbynistas taking over the London Labour Party,
which people seem
with
to
a
want
hard
right
left
now.
agenda.
That's what young people seem to want.
We'll see what the
election
heard the chant.
Oh, Jeremy Corbyn. That's what they're chanting.
Well, we'll see what it throws up next May. But I think residents will be alarmed at the prospect of the hard left being back in London running things, not just campaigning, but actually running things. And I think the Conservatives will do better than people say next May.
Obviously, Rushanara, it's been a huge success in London for Labour, but as a northerner myself, I look at your Brighton conference and it seems to be dominated by the Islington set. Is there a danger that you become a bit too London-centric?
Well, look, can I just address Greg's point, which I think it's just shameful that he's saying that London councils run by Tories is well run when we've seen the most horrifically badly run council, which presided over the fire in Grenfell Tower, and his government has deregulated housing and protection of social housing tenants, and that puts more tenants at risk. The Localism Act has downgraded the powers of the Housing and Communities Agency. I have personally dealt with hundreds of complaints before the Grenfell Tower fire, complaining to the Minister for Housing, Gavin Barwell, who's now sitting in number 10, asking him to do something about strengthening the regulation to protect tenants. And alongside
this
that,
is a 20-year issue.
Kensington.
Are you in danger of politicising this?
Because with respect, this is a Local Government Act of 2011 under the Conservatives, where they deregulated powers, and that's made it harder for residents. Harder for residents. I didn't interrupt you. Please let me finish. It makes it harder for residents to have a voice. It makes it harder for them to hold their tenants' management organisations to account, and in some cases housing associations. And it requires people to wait 8 weeks before and go to their local MP before a complaint is handled by the Ombudsman. Those are decisions and policies introduced by the Conservatives. So I find it scandalous that Greg is talking about well-run Tory councils with what's happened with Kensington and Chelsea. The second point is that in London, we have a housing crisis. The Conservatives have been in power for 7 years now, and they have presided over the lowest house building programme in records began, particularly when it comes to social housing, on Boris Johnson's watch.
Greg says part of the problem is Labour councils.
That's not true. What Labour councils are requiring, like my council, is that there is a high enough social housing element. It is not enough to build housing that is then bought by investors from overseas, and it doesn't deal with the social housing crisis.
Let me bring you back to my original point. Is there a danger that the Labour Party becomes too London-centric? Andy Burnham, Sarah Champion last week saying there wasn't enough presence of Northerners on the stage in Brighton. You've not had as much success in the rest of the country as you've had here in London.
Well, look, I think it's really important that we recognise the achievements here in London by Labour, as well as in other cities. That's where we have a stronghold. We do have a long way to go in reaching out to voters in parts of the country where we've lost votes, not just in recent
But unless you replicate what you're doing here in the North West.
But also in previous elections. So it is not about, we mustn't be complacent. We have to look at what the public want in different parts of the country and speak to their hopes and aspirations, and that's what we're doing. What you're hearing from Greg is negativity, and what you've got to remember is here in London, he talks about the hard left. Sadiq Khan is the Mayor of London. The reason why he is the Mayor of London is because he ran a positive, inclusive campaign, talked about the issues that affect Londoners, whereas Zach Goldsmith ran a nasty, divisive, racist campaign. That's why the Tories haven't done well in London.
Is part of the problem the messaging? Your old friend George Osborne, who you worked very closely with at the Treasury, now sitting as the editor of the London Evening Standard, the paper that people read on the way home, he's doing you no favours at all. Is he still your friend?
Well, he is actually, the Evening Standard is actually the biggest critic of the hard left takeover of the Labour Party in London.
Also a fierce critic of your government.
What about the hard right takeover of your party?
Well, hold on.
What about the hard right and being
I think what George Osborne is doing is he's being the editor of London's leading newspaper. And you would expect him, and I think his readers would expect him, to cast a critical eye over both parties, all parties, the government over Sadiq Khan, big critic of Sadiq Khan's decision on Uber, a big critic of local authorities which aren't well run, and a big critic of the London Labour Party and the hard left takeover of the London Labour Party. So I think in terms of the job that he does, not really for me to defend the editor of a newspaper, but I think he's responding to what his readers want to read.
OK, we'll leave it there for the moment. An area where the Conservatives are seemingly more in tune with Londoners than Labour, their opposition to the decision to terminate Uber's licence as of today. The decision was made by Labour Mayor Sadiq Khan's agency, Transport for London. Tory opposition was boosted this week when the Prime Minister told BBC London's political editor Tim Donovan Uber had not acted in Londoners' best interests.
Look, I think at a stroke of the pen, what the Mayor has done is risked 40,000 jobs and, of course, those 3.5 damage the lives of those 3.5 million Uber users. Yes, there are safety concerns and issues for Uber to address, but what I want to see is a level playing field between the private firms and our wonderful London taxis. Our black cabs are a great national institution. I want to see a level playing field. I think a blanket ban is disproportionate.
It sounds to me that you might not be, or you don't have any concerns about Uber, or if you do, would you not be prepared in any way to intervene?
You say, do I have concerns about Uber? I have said consistently that I think there are questions for them to answer, there are safety issues for them to answer, but what I think people want to see is choice, and what I think we want to see is a level playing field between the taxi cabs and the private hire vehicles.
Which you've said and been very clear on. Obviously, it is the Mayor's responsibility to deal with the licensing thing. Government are given him powers there. Do you not have any view about their tax status? They don't pay VAT on fares income. They pay very little in corporation tax. Isn't that something you could do something about?
Well, look, you've raised a wider issue about the question of businesses and ensuring that we do see businesses paying taxes and so forth. And that's something that this Conservative government has done more on than previous Labour governments. And we are very clear about that. What we want to see in relation to businesses is, yes, them taking their responsibilities, recognising their responsibilities to their communities.
Prime Minister there. Now, Rushanara, if I put this into perspective, 40,000 employees, Tata Steel had 15,000, Ford Dagenham at its peak had 40,000. If a Conservative minister or a Conservative mayor had put that number of jobs in danger, there would be a Labour outcry.
Well, this is an agency, the Transport for London agency.
Yes, but the chair is Sadiq Khan.
That has made the ruling that Uber is not fit and proper to hold the licence and have set out what needs to happen. Now, Uber needs to be constructive, deal with the issues that TfL have raised around sexual assaults that haven't been reported to the police. Frankly, the British public, and Londoners in particular, would not be thanking the Mayor or TfL.
But there could have been a more innovative way of approaching it. You could have granted the licence with tight restrictions.
This has been going on for a long time, where there have been court cases setting out what Uber needs to do around labour conditions and rights, sickness leave, holidays and much else. Uber has been intransigent and, frankly, the public would be rightly
$750,000 people have signed a petition.
questioning why TfL isn't putting safety first. Now, there is an opportunity for Uber now to negotiate and put in place the safeguards that TfL has set out that it requires, and that's what needs to happen. Now, I certainly recognise that there are thousands of jobs. Many of my constituents work for Uber. We need an agreement.
An Uber cab?
Yes, I've taken
so you
black
didn't
cabs.
Have concerns about
I've used black cabs. I've used different forms of cabs, local cab firms. People do want choice, but consumers want cab drivers, Uber drivers, black cab drivers, other private hire vehicles to run according to the same standards, but also that people get treated fairly as employees. Now, when Uber came into the scene, many Uber drivers said that because there weren't as many drivers, they could earn a decent living. A lot of that has changed.
In your constituency as well, Uber drivers. I mean, how many? 90% of them are Asian or from an ethnic minority. I would presume, disproportionately so. Many of them are in Bethnal Green and Bow.
Yes, a very high number are. What we need to do is look at how. What we need to do is look at how the gig economy is properly regulated. Safeguards are put in place so that it can operate and jobs can be created, as has been the case, but without disregarding the law, without putting safety at risk. And given that that has happened, we need both parties to work together in the interests of Londoners as well as those who work for them.
It's become highly politicised, this, hasn't it?
Well, it's inconceivable that Transport for London would have made the decision without referencing in any way the Mayor for London. And we know that Sadiq Khan wasn't originally going to be invited, even by Jeremy Corbyn, to go to the Labour conference. So by actually throwing out some red meat, a blanket ban on Uber, the Corbynistas, the Momentum types cheering him to the rafters, was a useful way of getting that invitation to go to Labour conference. I think most importantly here, this is a matter of consumer choice. Of course, Uber need to be properly regulated. All of these things need to be properly supervised, as all cab companies have to be. But the blanket ban, I think, is entirely wrong, has the potential to put a lot of people out of work, massive inconvenience to Londoners.
Does your family use Uber?
I've used Uber occasionally. I've got the app. I don't use it very often, actually, but I find it a good service. I use minicabs, like Rushanara said, black cabs as well.
Not worried they don't pay enough tax?
Well, the tax question is obviously a matter for HMRC and the tax authorities, but the government has taken major measures to ensure that foreign companies do pay tax properly. We've introduced the diverted profits tax to make sure that these companies are properly taxed.
We're out of time. That's all we have time for. My thanks to Rushanara and to Greg. And with that, it is back to Sarah in Manchester. We will be back at the same time, of course, usual time, next week. Thanks very much for joining us.